Well, this is certainly going to be an interesting day. Hey everybody, back again, and today we are going to be testing this brass wire mail shirt that I created against a couple of different weapons. I know you guys have probably seen chainmail tested. This is wire mail, and I'll get a close-up of this so you guys can see what I'm talking about, so you know what the difference is before we start testing. But we are going to be putting this through the gauntlet today just to see how effective this would be as a defensive barrier. We're going to be testing it against the 100-pound short bow with 3 different types of arrowheads. We have our bodkin, we have our gig point, and we have a broadhead. So we'll see how those do against the armor, see if they're capable of penetrating and what kind of damage they're going to do underneath that. I'm also going to be testing an axe to see if we can chop through this stuff. We're also going to be testing a Falx style sword. I chose this because of the point on it. It should be able to penetrate, and I want to see how far this is able to penetrate in a thrust. I also want to see how slashes from a light sword blade compare to something like this heavier Anglo-Saxon style long sword. And this also has a rounder, stouter tip. I also want to see if this is capable of penetrating. So just to show you guys, this is not made up of individual chain links. These are actually pieces of wire that run all the way through that are interwoven kind of in a twisted pattern. It's stiffer in the vertical plane, and in the horizontal plane it has room to collapse and group up. So this is going to be quite interesting. This is not your typical chainmail shirt, both in the fact that it is brass and it is this wire rather than chain. For today's testing, bear in mind that this bow is made of PVC and fiberglass. It has a fiberglass core and a PVC outer shell that gives it a 100-pound at 12-inch draw weight. So at 12 inches from where the string starts out, it is a 100-pound draw weight. What that means is that unlike a long bow or a tall recurve that's a 100-pound draw, it doesn't have all that distance to accelerate the arrow. It just has this short 12-inch span. So this isn't going to be quite as powerful, but it'll be a good example of a small horse bow or a small horseback bow, think Mongolian style bow, if this type of mail was used. So our first arrow is going to be this gig tip. This is for fish, birds, frogs, things like that, at least in terms of hunting. There were Persian and some European examples of arrows similar to these that were found on battlefields, but I can only imagine they either use them as some type of a fire basket, similar to the fire basket arrows, or possibly just a way to take somebody out of the fight without killing them. I'm not exactly sure why these would have been used on a battlefield. Drop it in the comments if you have any ideas as to why these kind of arrows might have been a battlefield utility. So let's get this shot off and see what it does against the armor. So on this first shot, it looks like we hit high. It did go straight through the armor and actually go through both of our layers of cloth here. This prong is the only one that actually went through the cloth. The twisted prong did not penetrate the cloth, kind of got hung up there. But it looks like it just went right past all of the mail. So here's our water jug. So I'm gonna go ahead, step back and try and hit this with another shot, see if I can land it on the jug so we can get a better idea of what this would do to a soft target behind this chainmail. We have a direct hit and it went through. It looks like this time our coiled section actually punched through along with one of those prongs and made it right past the chainmail and into that soft target. Looks like it carried quite a bit of impact with it when it did that. As you can see, there's actually 3 puncture holes and it kind of tore open. So that'd be a pretty nasty thing to get hit by. Now let's try our bodkin. These are actually meant for punching through plate armor, so this should work just fine. Let's go ahead and shoot this at it and see how it performs. So it looks like I missed my water jug, but it went through all the way and out the other side, and that mail didn't slow it down in the slightest. Now what is wild to me is trying to pull it back out, it's getting stuck on the mail. So it looks like it actually, this would have been very bad for you. Trying to get it out, it is hung up on that mail hard. That would be very bad because it would just be stuck in your body and through the mail. And no matter how hard you tried to fight that back out, it would stay inside. See if I can maybe just pull this through. Ugh. We definitely got it that time. It looks like it went right through the armor and about that far into our jug. It didn't pass the socket this time. And it looks like we hit our jug right there. Had quite a bit of impact and punched a pretty good sized hole in that side. And it left a pretty nasty hole in that cloth as well. Now I'm going to move on to the broadhead. This is going to be interesting because this is a very lightweight, very thin, sharp little broadhead. I'm thinking with the velocity that we have, we might be able to push the wire open and get this through, but I don't see this cutting through the wire. I don't see this making it through. But there's only one way to find out, isn't there? So surprisingly, it looks like we actually did manage to cut through the mail with this arrow. It didn't actually cut any of the mail, but it bent it out of the way and forced itself through. But it doesn't look like it managed to do anything to the cloth underneath. This seems like it slowed it down enough to actually stop it right before the cloth. But better results than I expected out of this broadhead. I did not think this was going to be able to make it past this wire mail. Now let's go ahead and get you guys some slow-mo footage of these arrows flying and impacting. I'm going to shoot those same 3 arrows out of that same 100-pound bow. So interestingly enough, this time, even though I was shooting at the exact same range, our broadhead bounced off. It didn't actually puncture this time, which is pretty interesting. That tells me that if there's something stiff behind here, it might just bounce out because there's too much tension in the wires for it to make it through. You can see right here where we hit, it just deformed a little bit and kind of cut into those pieces of wire. It actually broke one loose, but it didn't manage to stick that time. That's pretty interesting. Our gig head buried in all the way with these 2 prongs and went right past the mail, which is to be expected. Didn't really leave any marks on it aside from busting a chain right there. And our bodkin penetrated all the way through and out the other side. This nasty little thing is pretty brutal when it comes to mail. It just doesn't care if mail is in the way or not. We've got our little Viking style hand axe here, little war axe, bearded axe, whatever you want to call it. Let's see what it does through the armor here. I'm gonna try and hit it right where that jug is underneath. Well, it looks like it put a pretty good bend in the armor. It actually forced these chain links to get a permanent deformation. Didn't do anything to the cloth underneath. And it ripped that jug wide open. So the impact force from this was not slowed down anywhere near enough to save you. This would have saved you from getting, gashed by the weapon, but it would still be breaking ribs and doing all kinds of crazy damage underneath. We've got our lightweight Falk's sword. This is a pretty good cutting sword that I created a while back. So let's see how this defends. I'm sure that against the slash from this, it's just gonna bounce right off. It might have some impact force underneath, but this is a very lightweight sword. So let's just see what it does, shall we? So it looks like our slash came straight across through here, and we did manage to break a few pieces of it and bite into it in a couple of different spots. You'll see, like right here, where it bit into the wire, but not very much effect at all. Let's try our heavier Anglo-Saxon style sword. So it looks like on this one we hit right through here, and it deformed a lot of the links pretty well and kind of dragged them over. But I think since it can flex in this direction, it's less prone to breaking. We didn't get any snapped links on this cut, and it did try to bite in a couple of different spots on the metal, but it just bent it, didn't actually cut through. Now let's do our thrust testing. We're going to do a thrust test with this very round pointed sword first, this Anglo-Saxon long sword. Oh man. So this was the jug underneath, and as you can see, it made a huge hole in it. It cut its way in and just made a massive hole. And this weird bend you're seeing here, it's actually the armor. It actually dragged some of that wire through to create an opening for itself. So it actually made a nice weak spot in the armor right through here, where there's now a big gap where it dragged that wire through. Now, I didn't expect that broadsword to penetrate so well, so I'm kind of terrified for this poor little jug as to what this falx is going to do to it, especially with the flared tip. So let's find out, shall we? The flared tip actually stopped it after it went in, but it went straight through that cloth. And that's a pretty big piece of steel to have stuck in your chest. So interestingly, this is how it makes its way through. It actually pulls those coils straight and forces it open. So that blade had an opening that it created for itself right there on the mail and just punched right through. And our jug got a huge gash right the way through. So in the thrust, the two swords actually performed pretty similarly, which is very surprising considering the profile difference on these points. They both just blew right through that armor without even needing to use very much force for that thrust. So that was quite surprising. So unfortunately I don't have a spear to test against this, but I do have a pole blade glaive kind of critter that I made a while back. And I'm going to test the slash, the stab, and the throw on this against this chainmail now, just to see how it stacks up. So let's give it a slash real quick and see how it does. So our cut ran across here, and as you can see, it busted a couple of the links open, but didn't actually manage to get through to the cloth. Let's try the thrust and see how it does just in a straightforward thrust with that hatchet kind of double-edged point. So here's where our thrust hit, and as you can see, it did the same thing as the swords where it bent it all in, but it did actually make it through the mail and through the cloth enough to where I can get my finger through the hole from where it cut it open. So it would have poked you. Wouldn't have been, you know, a lethal wound by any means, but it definitely wouldn't be comfortable. I'm by no means a spear thrower, but let's go ahead and throw the polearm and see how this interacts with our armor. So you can see we hit it right on the edge here, and it mangled the metal through here, cut it to pieces, managed to cut the cloth up a little bit. I'm not sure whether the cloth got cut by the wire or the actual blade itself, but it would have saved you from getting it stuck in you, but it definitely wouldn't feel good. Now for the final test of the day, I'm going to be using a brass mace against this brass mail. I thought it was only fitting if I were to use a blunt force impact tool that was made out of the same material, just to kind of see what the effect would be if I, you know, hit it. So it looks like the flanges grabbed a hold of that mail and just mangled it, just crushed it all into one spot. That would definitely have delivered quite a bit of force, and whoever's wearing this mail shirt would definitely still be feeling the impact from it. Probably wouldn't be as torn up as they would if they weren't wearing it, but they would still get quite a heavy dosage of impact from this. So this brass wire link mail did a pretty decent job, I would have to say, against quite a few of these different attack mediums. Now, it's not going to stop anything that's actually designed for defeating armor by any means. But would you prefer this over not having it? Probably. If this was something you could have used back during the time period where brass mail was a thing and you couldn't afford brass mail, but you could somehow afford this, you'd definitely take it over just cloth, because it will slow down a lot of thrusts, it will stop a lot of deeper penetration from happening, and even against the sword thrusts, it seemed to slow them down a lot compared to what would happen if you didn't have that armor. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. Do me a favor, do that thing right there. And until next time, God bless, stay sharp out there. If you're looking for a custom sharp object like a sword, knife, axe, or polearm, check out the Etsy store. Link will be at the end of the video.